The stone came out of the frozen ground at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning in February, pulled by a rented excavator that cost Daniel Graves $340 for the day. Money he couldn't afford to spend, but had no choice except to spend because the bank's foreclosure notice gave him 45 days to vacate the property or somehow produce $127,000 in back payments on the farm loan his father had taken out 6 years before die. The stone was granite, roughly rectangular, 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, half buried in the southeast corner of the soybean field that formed the back 40 acres of what had been Graves' family land since 1954. Daniel had spent 29 years being told by his father, Robert Graves, never to touch that stone, never to dig near it, never to question why it sat there useless and heavy in otherwise plantable soil. His father had died 3 months ago without explaining. The fields had yielded poorly in the drought-plagued summer. The loan had come due, and the stone's location was exactly where a commercial solar company had expressed interest in leasing 3 acres at $1,200 per acre annually, enough to make a meaningful dent in what Daniel owed. But that had been 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, the solar company had withdrawn their offer, citing infrastructure costs. This morning, Daniel had nothing left to lose. He'd grown up in Fairmont, Nebraska, population 580, on 240 acres of flat farmland that produced soybeans, corn, and a barely sustainable income for a family of 3. His father had been a careful, deliberate man who worked 18-hour days during planting and harvest seasons, who maintained equipment meticulously, who never borrowed money until the year Daniel turned 23 and medical bills from his mother's cancer treatment had crested $340,000 despite insurance. The farm loan had been for $155,000, with the land as collateral, intended to be paid off gradually over 15 years. His mother had died anyway. His father had worked himself silent over the next 6 years, making payments, shrinking the principal to $127,000, then collapsing in the barn from a massive coronary at age 61. Daniel had inherited the debt, the land, and the final warning his father had managed to rasp out in the ambulance before losing consciousness. Don't move the stone. No explanation. Just that. For 3 months, Daniel had honored it while everything else collapsed. The farm's operating costs were $67,000 annually. Last year's harvest had netted $71,000 after expenses, barely enough to cover the loan payment and property taxes. It was different, darker, richer, as though something in the stone's composition had affected the earth. And beneath the surface, on the stone's western edge, his shovel had struck something that wasn't dirt or rock, something metallic. That had been enough. Yesterday, he'd driven to Hastings, 23 miles away, and rented the excavator with his credit card. This morning, he'd transported it on a flatbed trailer to the field and spent 2 hours learning its controls from a YouTube video on his phone. Now, with the hydraulic arm fully extended and the bucket positioned beneath the stone's center of mass, Daniel pulled the lever and watched 70 years of his father's warning become irrelevant. The stone lifted slowly, dirt cascading from its underside, revealing a cavity beneath that was too perfectly rectangular to be natural. The excavator's engine roared as Daniel maneuvered the stone 6 feet to the left and lowered it onto undisturbed ground. He shut off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no birds, just his own breathing and the tick of cooling machinery. Daniel climbed down from the excavator and approached the hole. Beneath where the stone had rested was a concrete-lined shaft, approximately 4 feet square, descending into darkness. Metal rungs formed a ladder along one wall. At the bottom, perhaps 10 feet down, something reflected his flashlight beam. His phone showed no signal. This corner of the property had always been a dead zone. Daniel stared into the shaft, his father's voice echoing in memory, and made the only choice left. He started climbing down. The ladder ended in a corridor, not a natural cave, but a constructed space with poured concrete walls, 7 feet high and 4 feet wide, extending 20 feet north before opening into a larger chamber. Daniel's flashlight beam swept across details that made no sense. Conduit running along the ceiling, LED fixtures that flickered to life as he moved forward, powered by a system he couldn't identify, and air that was cool and dry, circulated by vents he could hear but not see. The chamber was approximately 15 feet square, with metal shelving units along 3 walls and a steel table in the center. On that table sat a leather notebook, its cover cracked with age but intact, and beside it, a sealed envelope with Daniel's name written in his father's handwriting. The shelving units held wooden crates, 41 of them, each stenciled with serial numbers and dates ranging from 1962 to 1971. Daniel opened the nearest crate, his hands unsteady. Inside, packed in custom foam inserts, were gold bars, not coins or jewelry but refined ingots, each stamped with 999.9 fine gold, and a weight specification of 1 kilogram. The crate held 36 bars, arranged in 6 rows of 6. Daniel's mind went blank, then lurched into calculation. 1 kilogram was roughly 32.15 troy ounces. Gold was currently trading around $1,950 per ounce. 1 bar was worth approximately $62,700. 1 crate was worth $2.26 million. He opened 3 more crates at random, all identical. His legs failed, and he sat down hard on the concrete floor, the flashlight rolling away, the LED strips casting everything in sterile white light. 41 crates, $92,660,000. The envelope's seal broke easily. Inside was a letter, 3 pages in his father's precise handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. Daniel, if you're reading this, circumstances forced you to break the one rule I couldn't explain without explaining everything, which I lacked courage to do while alive. I'm sorry for that cowardice and for the burden this knowledge will bring. The gold belonged to your grandfather, Martin Graves, who never farmed a day in his life despite the story I told you. Martin was a commercial pilot in the 1950s and 60s, flying routes between the United States and South America for companies that didn't ask questions about cargo. He transported currency, documents, and occasionally items for people who paid extremely well for discretion. He was not a good man, but he was cautious. In 1962, a client hired him to move 1,400 kilograms of gold from a failed mining operation in Colombia to a private buyer in Montreal. The client provided falsified manifests and paperwork claiming the cargo was industrial equipment. Martin was paid $50,000 for the flight, more money than he'd made in 5 years of legitimate work. He never completed the delivery. Over Kansas, the aircraft developed engine trouble. Martin diverted to a private airstrip near Grand Island, declaring mechanical emergency, and offloaded the cargo into a rental truck while mechanics worked. He told his client the gold had been confiscated by customs officials during an emergency inspection, a plausible lie given the falsified paperwork. He filed insurance claims, provided documentation of the mechanical failure, and walked away from commercial aviation entirely. He bought this farm with a small portion of the gold, converted through private sales over 2 years to avoid suspicion, and spent the next 30 years living as though he'd never possessed anything more valuable than topsoil. When I was 18, he showed me the chamber and told me I could never touch it, never acknowledge it, never benefit from it while he lived. He was paranoid the original owners would somehow discover the theft, though he never specified who they were. Martin died in 1984. I'd already started farming by then, already believed that honest work was the only kind that let you sleep at night. The gold felt like a curse, blood money from people who'd probably done worse things to acquire it than my father did to steal it. I told myself I'd let it sit until I could find a way to anonymize it, to donate it somehow, but I never found that way. Every path forward required explanations I couldn't provide without incriminating my father posthumously or drawing attention to wealth I couldn't legally justify. So I left it. I let the stone mark the spot and told you to never move it, hoping the decision of what to do would fall to someone younger, braver, less paralyzed by guilt over crimes they didn't commit. The gold is legally yours. Martin died without heirs except me. I'm dead. You inherit my estate, including assets undisclosed. But it comes with weight beyond the physical. The original owners are likely long dead or imprisoned. The theft is beyond any statute of limitations. Still, liquidating this amount of gold will draw attention, require documentation, involve questions about provenance I cannot answer from the grave. If you keep it, be smarter than my father. If you use it, build something worth the moral compromise. If you can't carry the weight, find someone who can. I'm sorry I left you with debt and decisions. You're the best thing I ever built, and that required no gold at all. Robert, Daniel sat in the hidden chamber reading his father's letter 3 times, the LED strips humming above him, and felt the full architecture of his life rearrange itself. The careful, silent man who'd worked 18-hour days had been guarding a fortune while making loan payments he could have erased with a single gold bar. The grandfather Daniel had known only through stories. The hard-working immigrant who'd built the farm from nothing had been a thief who'd stolen from criminals and hidden in plain sight for 3 decades. The farm had never been built on honest soil. It had been built on gold and lies and fear. Daniel climbed back up the ladder with his grandfather's notebook, sealed the chamber, and repositioned the stone using the excavator. It settled back into place as though it had never moved. He returned the excavator to the rental company in Hastings, drove home, and sat at his kitchen table staring at the foreclosure notice. 45 days to produce $127,000 or lose everything. Beneath the stone, $92 million in gold that couldn't be touched without answering questions his father had spent 37 years avoiding. He called the one person he trusted with impossible problems. Sarah Chun answered on the 3rd ring. "Daniel, it's 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I need a lawyer who specializes in asset recovery and won't ask questions I can't answer," Daniel said. "Someone you trust with something complicated." Sarah had been his business law professor at University of Nebraska 4 years ago, before Daniel had dropped out to care for his dying mother. She'd stayed in touch, offered guidance when he'd needed help navigating his father's estate. Her voice sharpened. "What kind of complicated?" "The kind where the right answer saves my family's farm and the wrong answer puts me in a position I can't explain my way out of." Silence for 10 seconds. "There's a man in Omaha named Richard Castellano. Former federal prosecutor, now private practice, specializes in helping people with inheritance complications navigate disclosure requirements. He's expensive but discreet, and he's seen enough unusual situations that nothing surprises him. I'll text you his information. Daniel, whatever this is, be careful." Castellano's retainer was $15,000, paid with a credit card Daniel would need months to pay off. The consultation took place in a conference room overlooking downtown Omaha, with Daniel presenting his grandfather's notebook, his father's letter, and photographs of the chamber and its contents. Castellano, a trim man in his 60s with iron gray hair, read everything twice before speaking. "This is actually more straightforward than you think, though not simple. Your grandfather's acquisition was illegal, but he's deceased, beyond prosecution. The original owners, whoever they were, have no legal claim after 62 years without reporting the theft. The gold itself has been laundered by time. What you need is a narrative that satisfies the IRS and explains sudden asset disclosure without triggering criminal investigation. Which is, your grandfather maintained the gold was purchased legally over time through private transactions in the 1950s and early 60s, when gold ownership restrictions were lifting. He documented these purchases poorly, not unusual for the era, and stored the gold in a concealed location due to distrust of banking systems, also not unusual for men of his generation. Upon his death, your father discovered the cash but lacked expertise to properly disclose or liquidate it, so he left it untouched. You've now discovered it while preparing the property for sale and are proactively disclosing it as part of your father's estate for tax purposes. Will that work? It's plausible, documentable, and creates a tax liability you'll pay rather than a criminal case someone would have to prove. You'll owe estate taxes on the fair market value, approximately 40%, roughly $37 million. The remaining $55 million is yours, legally, to do with as you choose. Daniel stared at the conference table's polished surface. $37 million in taxes. $55 million remaining. Numbers that bore no relationship to the life he'd lived. The $127,000 debt that was drowning him, the stone his father had warned him about. The liquidation took 4 months, coordinated through Castellano's network of precious metal dealers, auction houses, and private buyers. The gold moved in carefully orchestrated sales that avoided flooding the market, with full documentation for every transaction. The IRS received disclosure, assessment, and payment of $37.2 million in estate taxes. The farm's debt was paid in full, $127,000 that felt microscopic against what remained. By July, Daniel had $54,680,000 in a managed investment account, and the farm in his name, free and clear. He spent 3 weeks walking the fields, thinking about what his father had said. If you use it, build something worth the moral compromise. The first thing he built was a nonprofit, the Graves Agricultural Relief Fund, capitalized with $20 million, designed to provide zero-interest emergency loans to family farmers facing foreclosure due to medical debt, natural disaster, or market collapse. The administration was handled by a board of agricultural economists and farmers, with criteria focused on operations under 500 acres, family-owned for at least 10 years, with demonstrated commitment to staying in farming. The fund would help 50 to 70 families annually, indefinitely. The second thing was a full scholarship program at Nebraska agricultural colleges, tuition, housing, and stipend for students from farming families, with preference for those who'd lost parents or faced economic hardship. The third was the farm itself. Daniel hired 3 local families who had lost their own land, offering them profit-sharing arrangements and modern equipment purchased outright. The 240 acres became a testing ground for sustainable practices, water conservation, and high-yield crop rotation, techniques they document and share freely with other small operations. By September, the stone was gone, removed to a county park as a memorial bench with a plaque reading Robert Graves, 1955 to 2023, farmer. The chamber was filled with concrete and planted over. The field was sown with winter wheat. Daniel stood at the southeastern corner on an evening in late September, the sun dropping toward the horizon, the wheat already showing green shoots, and called Sarah Chun. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for the referral, for asking the right questions. Did it work out? Better than I deserved. Worse than I'd hoped in some ways. There are pieces of this I'll carry forever. That's called being human, Daniel. How's the farm? Good. Really good. I've got help now, room to breathe. We're building something that might outlast me." After they hung up, Daniel walked back toward the farmhouse. The same structure his grandfather had bought with stolen gold, that his father had maintained through exhausting labor and deliberate silence. The same house where Daniel had learned to calculate margins, conserve resources, and measure worth in seasons rather than dollars. The land beneath his boots had always been good soil, regardless of what lay hidden below it. That was the thing his father and grandfather had both understood but expressed differently, that you couldn't change the past, but you could choose what grew from it. His grandfather had stolen from thieves and built a cover story. His father had chosen silence and honest work. Daniel had chosen disclosure, taxes, and the harder work of building something deliberately good from compromised foundations. $54 million was security, opportunity, the power to help families who faced what he'd faced. But the person who'd stood in the February cold, staring at a foreclosure notice with $4,100 to his name, that person was who he'd remain, the inheritor of lies and golden warnings, who'd moved the stone anyway and discovered that treasure was just another kind of weight, and you measured character by what you chose to carry. The wheat would be ready to harvest in June. The fund would mail its first relief checks in October. The scholarship students would start classes in January. And Daniel would wake each morning to work that mattered, on land that was finally, genuinely his. Not because of what his grandfather had stolen or his father had hidden, but because of what he'd chosen to build from the ruins of both. That was the inheritance that counted. The stone was gone, the secret was resolved, and the farm, for the first time in 70 years, stood on something more solid than gold buried in darkness. It stood on choices made in daylight, and that was enough.